Number 1. Brooklyn Heights. Brooklyn Heights is one of the oldest residential neighborhoods in New York City. It sits in northwestern Brooklyn, directly across the East River from Lower Manhattan, and is known for its calm streets and historic character. For many people, it represents a quieter and more elegant side of New York, shaped by brownstone houses, tree-lined blocks, and some of the best waterfront views in the city. The neighborhood began to grow in the 19th century, when Brooklyn was still separate from New York City. It became one of America's earliest commuter suburbs, with residents traveling by ferry to jobs in Manhattan. Later, the Brooklyn Bridge made that connection even stronger and helped the area become more established. What makes Brooklyn Heights stand out is how much of its old character remains intact. Its architecture is one of its biggest defining features, especially the rows of brownstones and historic homes that give the neighborhood a consistent look. The Brooklyn Heights Promenade also plays a major role in its identity, offering wide views of the skyline, the harbor, and nearby landmarks. Today, Brooklyn Heights matters because it combines history, beauty, and location in a way that feels very distinct within New York City. Number 2. Harlem. Harlem is a large and historically important neighborhood in Upper Manhattan. Over time, it became one of the most influential centers of Black culture in the United States, especially during the early 20th century. That period is closely tied to the Harlem Renaissance, when writers, musicians, artists, and thinkers helped turn the neighborhood into a major cultural force. Jazz clubs, theaters, churches, and community spaces all played a role in shaping its identity. The neighborhood changed many times across its history. It began as a rural Dutch settlement, later became a more suburban part of Manhattan, and then grew rapidly as transportation improved and more residents moved uptown. By the early 1900s, Harlem had become a center of African American life, attracting people from across the South and the Caribbean. What makes Harlem stand out is that it has always been more than a place on a map. It is closely connected to music, literature, politics, religion, and civil rights history. Landmarks like the Apollo Theater helped make Harlem famous far beyond New York. Today, Harlem matters because it remains one of the city's strongest symbols of cultural identity, creativity, and historical importance. Number 3. SoHo. SoHo is a neighborhood in Lower Manhattan, whose name comes from south of Houston Street. It is known for its cast-iron buildings, wide loft spaces, and strong connection to art, fashion, and shopping. Today, many people think of SoHo as a stylish commercial area filled with boutiques and busy streets, but its identity began very differently. In the 19th century, SoHo was a manufacturing district, with warehouses and industrial buildings. After industry declined, many of those large upper floors were left empty. During the mid-20th century, artists began moving into the area because the spaces were big, open, and relatively affordable. That shift gave SoHo a new cultural role and helped turn it into one of New York's most famous artist neighborhoods. What makes SoHo stand out is the architecture. Its cast-iron facades are some of the most recognizable in the city, and they give the neighborhood a look that feels both historic and urban. The old industrial buildings also shaped the loft lifestyle that became closely associated with the area. Today, SoHo matters because it shows how an industrial district can change into a cultural and commercial landmark while still keeping a strong visual identity. Number 4. Greenwich Village. Few parts of New York carry the same reputation for creativity and independence as Greenwich Village. Often called simply the Village, this Lower Manhattan neighborhood became closely linked to writers, musicians, political activists, and artists who helped shape its image during the 20th century. Its smaller streets also make it feel different from much of Manhattan. Instead of the long, regular grid found uptown, many blocks here follow older paths that give the area a looser, more intimate feel. That unusual street pattern reflects its earlier history. Greenwich Village began as a separate settlement outside the main city, and for a long time it stood apart from the dense commercial center farther south. As New York expanded, the neighborhood was absorbed into Manhattan, but it kept much of its distinct layout and character. The village later became known for bohemian culture, folk music, and social change. Cafes, clubs, bookstores, and small performance spaces gave it a reputation as a place where new ideas could grow. Washington Square Park became one of its best-known gathering points and still anchors the neighborhood today. What matters about Greenwich Village is not just its age or its buildings, but the atmosphere it created. It became one of the clearest symbols of New York as a place for experiment, expression, and cultural change. Number 5. Williamsburg. Change is probably the word most people associate with Williamsburg. Located in northern Brooklyn along the East River, it was once known mainly as a working industrial area filled with factories, warehousing, and modest housing. For much of its history, It was a neighborhood shaped by labor, immigration, and manufacturing rather than fashion or nightlife. That older foundation still matters. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Williamsburg grew through industry and through communities arriving from different parts of Europe, later followed by other immigrant groups and long-established local families. Even today, parts of the neighborhood still reflect that layered past, especially in areas connected to Hasidic Jewish life, older residential streets, and remnants of its industrial waterfront. Its modern image began to form when artists, musicians, and young professionals were drawn to large former factory spaces and lower rents than Manhattan. Over time, galleries, cafes, bars, and new apartment towers changed the area dramatically. The waterfront, once tied to shipping and industry, became one of the most visible symbols of that shift. Williamsburg matters because it captures one of the biggest stories in modern New York: how a working neighborhood can be transformed by culture, money, and redevelopment, while older communities and identities continue to exist within it. Number 6. Chinatown. On some streets in Chinatown, the neighborhood announces itself immediately. Red signs, busy storefronts, open produce stands, seafood markets, restaurants, bakeries, and crowds moving through narrow sidewalks all create one of the most visually distinct street environments in New York. Located in Lower Manhattan, Chinatown became one of the city's most important immigrant neighborhoods and remains closely tied to Chinese community life, language, food, and commerce. Its growth was shaped by migration, exclusion, and survival. Chinese immigrants faced heavy legal and social barriers in the 19th and early 20th centuries, which pushed the community into a more concentrated area where businesses, family networks, and associations could support daily life. Over time, Chinatown developed into both a residential neighborhood and a commercial center, serving locals as well as later generations of visitors. What gives Chinatown its importance is not just appearance, but function. It has long been a place where newcomers could find familiar language, work, food, services, and a sense of continuity in a new country. Even as New York changes around it, that role still matters. Chinatown stands out because it feels active, practical, cultural, and deeply rooted all at once. Number 7. Upper East Side. The Upper East Side is one of the neighborhoods most closely tied to wealth, formality, and old Manhattan prestige. On the eastern side of Central Park, it developed a reputation for grand apartment buildings, private schools, cultural institutions, and a quieter kind of status than the busier commercial parts of the city. For many people, it represents a polished and established version of New York. Part of that image comes from its location and institutions. Museum Mile, which includes places like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, gives the neighborhood a strong cultural identity, while its wide avenues and elegant residential streets reinforce the sense of order and permanence. Much of the area grew during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when wealthy families built mansions and later moved into upscale pre-war apartment buildings. Even so, the Upper East Side is not only about luxury. It also includes everyday residential blocks, local businesses, and long-term residents who give the neighborhood a steady rhythm beyond its reputation. That balance helps explain why it has remained so durable. What makes the Upper East Side matter is that it reflects a very specific idea of New York: refined, expensive, traditional, and closely linked to the city's cultural and social establishment. Number 8. Astoria. Astoria feels more local than many of the neighborhoods people usually mention first when they talk about New York. In northwestern Queens, it built its identity through everyday life rather than spectacle. Apartment buildings, small houses, family-run businesses, cafes, bakeries, and busy neighborhood streets give it a lived-in character that feels steady and practical. It is the kind of place where the local atmosphere matters as much as any landmark. Immigration shaped Astoria from early on, and that history remains one of its defining features. The neighborhood became especially well known for its Greek community, which helped leave a strong mark through restaurants, churches, shops, and social life. Over time, Astoria also became home to people from many other backgrounds, giving it a broader mix while still keeping that older association. Its location also plays a role. Astoria sits close enough to Manhattan to stay connected to the city's center, but it does not feel built around Manhattan in the same way some other areas do. That gives it a stronger neighborhood identity of its own. Astoria matters because it represents another side of New York: immigrant, residential, culturally mixed, and grounded in daily routine rather than image alone.